Hey, welcome back. Today I just want to talk a little bit about some of the books I've been liking lately. Now, a couple of these are old books. Actually, all of them are pretty old books. So, chances are you might have heard of or even read a couple of them. But I'm just going to tell you about them anyway. Now, I've got 4 books that I want to talk about today that I've just been enjoying lately. So the first book that I wanted to talk to you about was this one, A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Now you might already know this book, not only because it is quite famous, but also because there's a really good film adaptation of it. It's got Martin Freeman in it. It's worth a watch. I think this is the first of 5 books, and they're all great. And also, as you can see, they're not very long. So, if you don't love having to spend a whole lot of time on a read, this one could be for you. I'll read you the blurb. One Thursday lunchtime, the Earth gets unexpectedly demolished to make way for a new hyperspace bypass. For Arthur Dent, who has only just had his house demolished that morning, this seems to already be more than he can cope with. Sadly, however, the weekend has only just begun. The galaxy is a very strange and startling place. So maybe, by the sound of that, you can gather that this book is it's a comedy. And it's just really it's really imaginative, and the way that Douglas Adams writes it, it's just really clever, quirky. It's just so interesting. So it's got (179) pages. It's just got really great characters, and it's just quite an easy read. It's light-hearted, it's funny. But it still manages to be gripping, you know? So, if you're looking for something light and fun, but still, complex somehow, this one's for you. Next up, this is one that I studied in school, and you might also have. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now I know this one might be a slightly controversial pick because a lot of people studied this book and then, as a result, hated it. I think school really had that effect on some of the things that I learned about. However, I went to the same school as my older sister, and she studied it first, and I read it while she was studying it, and then I already came to love it before it was my turn. Let me read you the blurb. Lizzie's embarrassing mother is determined to pay her off as soon as possible, but when she's introduced to the highly eligible bachelor Darcy, Lizzie decides he is far too aloof for her liking. He, for his part, seems totally indifferent to her. Then she discovers that he's been meddling in her family's affairs and is determined to dislike him more than ever. But what are Darcy's real motives? Is he more interested in Lizzie than he'll care to admit? And could pride stop them both from admitting what they really feel? Now I think that the blurb of this book doesn't really do it justice. The best description I could give it is an 1800s rom-com. This, I think, was published, is it 1813? Let me check. There you have it. First published 1813. I've done my research. So, it was written that far back, but I feel like it still really holds up to the test of time. Like, there's dialogue in here and sort of descriptions of thought process and things that I'm like, that still rings true to this day. I guess the story is sort of about the main character Lizzie, her desire to find love rather than to be paired off into marriage with someone that she doesn't care about. And it's just really clever, I think. It also has one of my favourite ever scenes in it. Oh, it'll be a huge spoiler. I can't tell you about it. But there's a scene in it where she just tears someone down, and it is so cathartic to read. Because you're just waiting for someone to put them in their place. There is also a movie adaptation of this, but I don't recommend it. I mean, some people obviously enjoy it, but I think only because I'm such a fan of the book, I just can't really get into it because it cuts out so much and like it changes the plot a bit. However, if you're a real nerd for this book like I am, there's a 6-part series made by the BBC. It's quite old now. It's got Colin Firth in it. That I think does a really good job, both with like casting and like it includes everything that I think is important. So if you're ready to commit to roughly 6 hours worth of watching, that's the one I would go for. Something that I find really funny about this book as well is that there's a character in it, Lizzie's sister, and her name is Jane. And Jane is described to be like the loveliest and the most beautiful, like most perfect woman ever. And it's written by Jane Austen. She really just said she's the best woman in the whole world and her name is Jane. I would recommend this one for if you want a sort of slow and interesting read. And obviously you want to be interesting, but this one is lengthy, and honestly there were quite a few words in it that I had to Google, which made me feel a bit stupid, but you know, 1800s lingo. But it's really one that sucks you in. Like, I got so absorbed in the plot, I got so invested. So if you've got a little bit of time on your hands, or you just want something immersive, this one's for you. And the third book that I have for you is this big boy. It Devours by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Craner. And it's a Welcome to Nightvale novel. Some of you might have heard of Welcome to Nightvale. It's a podcast. And it's really good. I do recommend that as well. It's sort of like, it's a fictional radio show from this town where things are all like a bit spooky and like a bit weird. It's really hard to describe, but absolutely check it out. It was one of the first ever podcasts that I listened to. I used to listen to it to get to sleep because the host, his voice is really lovely, so calming. But because it's a bit spooky, like, I would just be drifting off, and then it would get to an episode which was like a bit creepy, and then I'd be like lying in the bed, like. So, most of the time, it's perfect for sleeping. And this book, it's set in the town of Nightvale, from the podcast. And it has the same qualities of being a little bit sort of a bit spooky, a bit weird, but like still a comedy. And it features some of the characters from the show. I'll read you the blurb. From the authors of the New York Times best-selling novel Welcome to Nightvale and the wildly popular podcast of the same name comes a mystery exploring the intersections of faith and science, the growing relationship between two young people who want desperately to trust each other, and the terrifying toothy power of the smiling god. Nilanjana is an outsider to the strange town of Nightvale. Working for Carlos the scientist, she relies on fact and logic as her guiding principles. When all of that is put into question, when Carlos gives her an assignment investigating a mysterious rumbling in the desert wasteland outside of town. This investigation leads her to the joyous congregation of the Smiling God, and to Daryl, one of its most committed members. Caught between her beliefs in the ultimate power of science and her growing attraction to Daryl, Nilanjana begins to suspect the congregation is planning a ritual that could threaten the lives of everyone in town. She and Daryl must search for common ground between their very different worldviews as they are faced with the congregation's darkest and most terrible secret. I've also just found in here a bookmark that I must have been using last time I read it. Some cockatoos. Also, this book is a hardcover, which I really love. I just feel like it's really nice for, when you're in bed, and you're like trying to prop it up on one side so that you can lie down and read at the same time. Now, I would recommend this to people who want a bit of a quirky read, but it's not too complex, and it's fun. Definitely it's fun. But I would also recommend listening to the podcast first. So for my final recommendation is this one. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. Now this one is the exception out of my little collection here, in that it's a non-fiction book. It was written by a neurologist, Oliver Sacks, and it's basically just a compilation of his most interesting case studies. Let me read you the blurb. In his most extraordinary book, Oliver Sacks recounts the stories of patients lost in the bizarre, apparently inescapable world of neurological disorders. These are case studies of people who have lost their memories and with them the greater part of their pasts, who are no longer able to recognize people and common objects, whose limbs have become alien, who are afflicted and yet are gifted with uncanny artistic or mathematical talents. In Dr. Sacks' splendid and sympathetic telling, each tale is a unique and deeply human study of struggling against incredible adversity. Now, I really agree with what the blurb said about the writing being sympathetic, because what I think makes this book really interesting, and unlike just reading from a medical journal, is that Oliver Sacks writes these sort of stories about his patients very, sympathetically. So, it's not just a description, it's beautiful writing. And of course, it's just super interesting to learn about the sort of things that the human brain is capable of, or incapable of in some of the cases. The story that it's named after, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, was a really interesting one. So this man, he had a kind of brain damage which meant that he couldn't identify objects on their own. He could identify them from connotations or contexts or other things, but he just had absolutely no idea if you showed him a glove, he would just go, it's a sort of container with 5 appendages, and he would not be able to link together that it was a glove. And it's much more interesting than I'm making it sound. But there are lots and lots of stories in here. So there are 4 parts. Part 1, losses. Part 2, excesses. Part 3, transports. Part 4, the world of the simple. And each of those parts sort of describes what sort of cases the chapters within them describe. So if you're at all interested in psychology, or even just learning about people, this one is absolutely for you. It definitely had a couple of words that I had to look up, but I feel like that's understandable for anyone who is not a neurologist. And it was a really entertaining read. It was just so interesting. So I recommend this one to all non-fiction lovers and to the psychology fans. Okay, so that's all the books that I wanted to show you today, and I hope that some of you might find some of them interesting, even give them a read. And what I'd like to ask is if any of you guys have read anything lately that you think I might enjoy, please let me know. I'm looking for some new stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good night.